are few left. And it's estimated that within the next 10 years, we'll see the last American World War II veteran leave us. So it adds urgency to our mission, what we're doing at the museum, collecting and preserving stories of World War II veterans. And we got a late start, really. Was anyone there when the museum opened in New Orleans in 2000? Great, yeah. There were thousands of veterans, and it was said to have been one of the biggest gatherings of American World War II veterans since the end of the war. And we just celebrated 25 years. So we're looking back at our history, at our origins. And while so many veterans were present at that event, I still often hear that my dad never made it to the museum. I heard from Judy earlier, who said that her parents were able to go, but just at the very, very beginning. But I often hear, oh, we wanted to make it there, but didn't. So we're trying to honor as many veterans as we can and still bring veterans to the museum. Now, this is an image from the museum's opening on D-Day, June 6, 2000, and we opened as the National D-Day Museum. So museum founders, Dr. Stephen Ambrose and Dr. Nick Mueller, are in the center. No. So they're in the center there. Oh, I just did that, Adam. All right, let's see. There we go. Yeah, so they're in the center by that ribbon, and they're surrounded by some famous folks you might recognize. Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg were there, and thousands of World War II veterans. So the early story of the museum focused on the Normandy invasion and was tied to the museum's location in New Orleans partially because 20,000 of the iconic Higgins boats were designed and built by Higgins Industries in New Orleans. You can see we have two on display. This is a relatively recent image from the museum. So two of the Higgins boats that are on exhibit. And much of our early collection is from the New Orleans area and from Louisiana veterans. So we have a lot to work with when we talk about Louisiana in World War II. But the scope of the museum, scope and mission of the museum increased, especially in 2004, which is when we received the congressional designation as the National World War II Museum. So we've been expanding ever since. And our mission, the National World War II Museum, let's see if Dr. Foreman can recite this still in his sleep. Almost every staff member can recite the museum's mission statement. And I think that's a good thing, right? The National World War II Museum tells the story of the American experience in World War II, why it was fought, how it was won, and what it means today, so that all generations understand the price of freedom and are inspired by what they learn. So that's the core of what we do. And the major expansion, this is what we look like now. If you haven't been to the museum in a while, it's pretty different. So we have, the major expansion began in 2009. So around the time that I joined, it was part of the post-Katrina regrowth of the museum, 2008, 2009. A lot of us came on board. And the museum's grown to a 7-acre campus with 7 pavilions and more than 50 exhibit galleries. So there's a lot to see. Don't let it deter you, though. That's something that we're kind of struggling with. People think they can't come to the museum and see us unless they have 3 days. So there's a lot. You got to be purposeful in your visit. See what you want to see. But please come. Our immersive exhibits take visitors into the jungles of Guadalcanal, in the road to Tokyo, or the cold pines of the Ardennes forest in the Battle of the Bulge, in the road to Berlin. And we also examine difficult subjects like the wartime incarceration of Japanese American citizens and the bitter irony of fighting a fascist enemy with a segregated armed forces. The museum has a robust educational mission. Dr. Foreman was part of that as well. And we welcome learners of all ages. This is a scene from the Bob and Dolores Hope Theater Camp. I wish this little miss looked a little happier in her role there, but right, yeah, probably thinking real hard about those lines or something. Um, but we also, have a student travel program, which takes high school and college students to the sites where history was made. And our educational travel programs brings thousands of people around the world to sites of international importance and also to visit New Orleans. So we have a lot going on campus besides our exhibits. And then our digital presence extends far beyond the museum walls with more than 34 million online engagements annually. So clicks and all that good stuff. And at the heart of all these endeavors, though, is the personal story. So the personal stories of those who served. And I received another one yet today that we can add to our collection of personal stories, personal narratives. We are still looking for that, and I'm happy to talk to you about that effort. That's a big part of what I do as a curator is help to find stories and collect material. So our collection consists of more than 300,000 personal artifacts and 12,000 personal narratives, accounts from the war, 12,001 now, from every theater and branch of service, homefront workers, and Holocaust survivors. And these irreplaceable materials and individual stories enable us to present a personal story of the war. And I think that surprises a lot of first-time visitors who are thinking, yes, you can also dive deep into, battle maps and plans, but we also provide a personal look into the war. We also have a traveling exhibits program, which brings our content to museums across the country. So 7-acre campus isn't enough, right? We are taking our exhibits and our stories to other museums. This is a show that I curated on American service women. So women in the Women's Army Corps, in the auxiliary branches of the Navy and Marines, as well as Army and Navy nurses. And this is at the Henry Ford Museum in Detroit currently. And in October, it will open at the Atlanta History Center. So this is a pretty big, big exhibit with over 200 artifacts. So one of our early and sadly retired traveling exhibits centered on our state's wartime landscape. And that was the Pelican State Goes to War, Louisiana in World War II. And this appeared at the museum in 2017. And then it traveled the state for a number of years. So it went to such places as Winsboro, Farmerville, Lake Charles, Alexandria, Baton Rouge, Thibodaux, Lafayette, and back to New Orleans, ending its run in 2021. That's in Thibodaux, I think, at the Nichols State. Looks really great there. So it was also had a great cypress. The cases were made out of Louisiana cypress, so that was a fun insider thing, and it was a beautiful show. We hope to bring back this show in some kind of version because there's a lot of interest in this, especially for schools and libraries all around the state who want to know more. So exhibit topics included Louisiana, a little background, Louisiana before the war, and then of course the political and social climate of Louisiana during World War II, the expanding role of Louisiana in World War II, and that's where I'll spend a lot of time tonight. So before World War II, Louisiana like every other place, pretty much, was ravaged by the Great Depression. Governor Huey Long had been assassinated in 1935, but the state was still under control of the Long machine. Reformist candidates, including the new governor Sam Jones, swept into office in 1940, promising to clean up the state government and give the people of Louisiana honest leadership. Few people in Louisiana wanted the US involved in another war. But when the time came, they proved ready. But even before that time, before the official entry into World War II with the Pearl Harbor attack, Louisiana was front and center in the buildup to war. And the areas surrounding Shreveport, Alexandria, and Natchitoches served as some of the locations for the largest war games in American history. And this is an image from Natchitoches from May 1940. So those were the initial maneuvers. In May 1940, more than 60,000 soldiers from around the country trained in the state. And then in 1941, that was the big show, the Louisiana maneuvers in Shreveport from August to September 1941 involved 400,000 military personnel. And that was really the biggest of those exercises. These maneuvers tested new tactics, including an independent armored force, smaller, more mobile divisions, and combined arms that tied together artillery and armor and infantry and air power. So they were testing out some things that would come into play very soon after. These exercises also tested the leadership qualities of U.S. Army commanders, and the big guys were all there: Dwight Eisenhower, George Patton, and New Orleans-born J. Lightning Collins. I think I have another image. Oh, here we go. Army's battle in Louisiana. So there was the Red Army and the Blue Army, and they fought each other, basically. You know, there was strategy. They worked out these exercises. And these war games led to some strange interactions. So people were still living on the land at the time. So, you know, a lot of civilians came into contact with these armies. Or, you know, they were in people's fields with, you know, the animals and such. So it led to some strange interactions for the local population. But the maneuvers were serious exercises that proved vital while engaging the real enemy. Oh no, we skipped forward like the whole PowerPoint. Close your eyes, everybody. Oh, close your eyes and don't. Yeah, well, you get a glimpse, right? Spoiler.
Y'all saw me test it. You saw me test it, you said.
Now you know the whole thing. It's okay.
Point it back here.
If anybody point it back there. Okay, I think that was next. All right. Sorry for that, folks. So in addition to and following on the maneuver, so I think everyone, you know, many people became familiar with Louisiana because of the maneuvers. Almost 500,000 people came to Louisiana, many for the first time. And I think a lot of people really weren't thrilled to be here because it was hot and there were mosquitoes and, you know, yeah, you know, they're not cut out for it. They're not, you know, but so we do have some funny letters in the collection where, you know, people talk about, you know, how terrible the weather is in Louisiana and they can't wait to get out of this god awful place. But It wasn't just the maneuvers that brought people to Louisiana, of course. We had 8 of the 9 largest Army camps were in the South. So not just in Louisiana, but in southern states. And half of all who served spent some time in the South. And an estimated 1/3 of all who served were exposed to Louisiana. So central Louisiana had Camps Claiborne and Camp Livingston. There was Camp Beauregard, Villeray, and Fort Polk in the New Orleans area. And then we had the Naval Air Station in New Orleans and the Naval Reserve Air Station, as well as the Army Air Corps base at Camp Leroy Johnson. But Selman Field in Monroe, so you see a couple of pieces here from Selman Field. Selman Field was the largest navigation training facility in the United States during World War II. And it was the only airfield in the entire country where a recruit could complete a navigation course from start to finish, rather than going from taking some courses here and then going to an advanced navigation school elsewhere. And one of Selman Field's best-known graduates was Theodore Dutch Van Kirk, the navigator on the Enola Gay, when it dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima on August 5th, 1945. So we just passed that anniversary just 2 days ago. By war's end, more than 15,000 men had trained here at Selman Field. And you probably can't see that. I'm happy to share some of this with you after, but the certificate on the right is a hand-drawn, beautifully hand-lettered certificate to Bob Hope, who came and did one of his performances at Selman Field. So he gave all of his wartime radio shows from in front of a servicemen and women audience. And so he gave one show at Selman Field, and they wrote him a thank you certificate, which is a riff on Thanks for the Memory, Bob's signature song. And this is in the collection of the National World War II Museum. We received a donation from Bob Hope's family. So we have that. And that's actually traveling. We had a traveling exhibit on Bob Hope as well. And so that went around to different institutions. But that's, a piece directly related to Selman Field. And so you see Louisiana played a major role in military training overall. And great number of Americans were introduced to Louisiana during the war. We'll talk about that just a little later. I'm so scared to go to the end again.
We saw it.
Or, right, you don't need to see it again, do you? Okay. So this another important contributing factor to the influx of servicemen to the state was the classification of New Orleans as a port of embarkation in July 1941 by the Embarkation Corps. The New Orleans Port of Embarkation had a very sad acronym, NOPE. Nope. It was one of 8 of the ports of embarkation during the war. It wasn't even the smallest, so it was the second smallest in terms of passengers and cargo moved. Charleston was the smallest, but the biggest were in New York and San Francisco. But New Orleans, you can see this is an aerial view of the port here. And in all, 166,696 passengers and 7,240,000 tons of cargo were moved through the New Orleans port of embarkation. I think there's a tendency to think of the battlefields of World War II as faraway places, right? Pearl Harbor, Midway, Pointe-du-Hoc and Normandy. But World War II came knocking in Louisiana. coastal Louisiana anyway. And German submarines, this is one seen here, U-boats. They crawled through the Gulf of Mexico beginning in 1942. Merchant ships were coming out of New Orleans. They were torpedoed within sight of shore. And the SS Robert E. Lee was sunk at the entrance of the Mississippi River on July 30th, 1942, by the German submarine U-166. This was part of the German U-boat campaign, Operation Drumbeat, and they launched that campaign in January 1942. It was designed, the purpose was to interrupt shipping in U.S. coastal waters, so not only in the Gulf, but along the East Coast as well. And in the spring and summer of 1942, the Gulf became a battleground where German submarines easily targeted and sank largely defenseless U.S. merchant ships. Especially vulnerable were oil tankers. So we also have oil here in the South. I don't know if I don't concentrate too much on that, but of course that's part of the wartime Louisiana story. Oil tankers were carrying precious fuel from refineries across the coast to propel all of these merchant Allied vessels of all kinds to victory. Oil production increased during the war to meet this astounding demand of 5 million barrels a day at peak production. But getting the oil from source to refinery was a pretty dangerous business, and that's one that impacted South Louisiana. Does anybody remember what the next slide is? I can't remember if I need to. Oh, okay. That's good. We're kind of skipping ahead a little bit, but in the early days of the Operation Drumbeat, American ships were sitting ducks. We hadn't established a convoy system. They were unarmed mainly, and so they were like, "Hey, here I am. Come and get me." Right. And in the first half of 1942, U-boats sank 58 ships in the Gulf. Coastal residents could see flaming wrecks off the shore. There are people that remember, and this is all along the coast from Galveston to Florida, where they could see the wrecks. Also, debris from the vessels would wash onto shores, and then fishermen and shrimpers were aiding in rescue and recovery of those who were sunk on these ships, oil-soaked survivors, burn victims. So the war wasn't a far-off abstraction for coastal Louisiana. They knew what this meant. And in all, 24 U-boats passed through the Gulf of Mexico during the war. So it wasn't just one out there prowling around, 24. So as losses mounted, the Navy put several measures into place to ensure safe passage. And that convoys, I mentioned, escorts, so armed escort ships or naval armed guard who were aboard the merchant ships, increased coastal defense, and then also one of the lesser known weapons in the American air fleet, the lighter than air squadrons, LTAs, or blimp squadrons. So this is kind of an interesting Louisiana story, I think, that maybe some of you know about, but a lot of people haven't heard about this or find this very strange. Blimps, we use blimps. So Homa, then a city of 9,000 residents, was centrally located along the Gulf of Mexico, and it became home to Naval Air Station Homa. And in August 1942, construction began 3 miles outside of city limits on a grassy landing strip, so it was already the airfield. and roughly 1,700 acres of cane fields surrounding that airstrip. And it took a long time to build after a long period of development, drainage, excavation, pile driving, all of this. The buildings rose up. It cost around $10 million. It was really expensive to build. The most significant endeavor was the erection of this massive hangar. And it's about 1,000 feet long, 300 feet wide, 190 feet high. And it was large enough to house 6 fully inflated LTAs. Because of wartime shortages, the building was made out of wood mainly. And it was one of the largest wooden structures in the world at the time. Sadly, not there anymore. It was sold off, but you can see some, if you go to Blimp Road, I think it's called, you can see some of the structure still. The doors were so massive. So this is one of the doors here. The doors were so massive, they required 17 small trucks. You can kind of see that tractor there to move them along these curved railroad tracks on which they sat. And then they also had those mooring out circles. You can see the blimp is tethered to the structure. So that's how they kept them in place while landing, refueling, or during maintenance. So the air base at Homa was commissioned on May 1st, 1943. 2 weeks later, May 14th, the first blimp arrived, and the Blimp Squadron, Airship Squadron 22, was activated. At full, they called it ZP-22. It consisted of 6 airships. So they had 6 airships, 6 blimps that were stationed in Homa. They had about 150 officers, enlisted men, and Marines who were stationed there and operated ZP-22. They called themselves the Bayou Bombers. Pretty great. There's another view of the hangar and the doors. There we go. They had a really great Walt Disney designed patch. So Walt Disney designed several, many insignia, and this was one. So the men of ZP-22 took to their new home, South Louisiana homeland. I'm sure there were the people that hated the mosquitoes and everything too, but you can see they kind of got into the Louisiana lore with the Bayou Bombers, and they started naming their blimps too, because you do that, right? They had nose art with things painted on, names painted on the side of planes. Why not you're going to name your blimp as well? But they were named things like Jean Lafitte, Dominique Yu. So they also were, local residents supported those at the base by donating recreational supplies for them, and also hosting fishing trips, taking them out, and really showing them family time. But April 1944, nearly a year into their service, it was a tragic month for ZP-22. On April 19th, K-133, that's one of the 6 blimps, was out on a routine patrol over the Gulf. So their job, blimps were used because they could hover very low and slow, and they could, they would just watch, basically, eye in the sky. They would patrol coastal waters. And so K-133, April 19th, 1944, was lost in a storm in the Gulf of Mexico. After fighting the storm for 40 minutes, K-133 went down in the Gulf, and poor visibility and rough seas hampered a search for this downed blimp. So the crew managed to escape, but 9 of the men, so they had a crew of 10, 9 of the men drowned in the waves, and there was one survivor, Ensign William Thews. He was rescued after 21 hours in the Gulf, supported only by a life jacket. And that's him. You can see some of their newspaper reports, and you can also read the blimp base had a newsletter, the Delta News. It was DELTA, so it was very clever. But yeah, so there was one survivor, and so one of the 6 blimps was lost, and then catastrophe continued. The same storm system produced wind gusts of 70 miles per hour, and you saw those the hangar and the giant doors. It damaged the hangar, and they weren't able to get the doors fully closed. So on April 21st, so just a few days after K-133 went down the Gulf, 3 of the remaining 5 blimps were torn from their moorings inside of the hangar, and they just flew out. There was nothing that anyone could do to stop them, so chaos ensued. 3 blimps, 2 crash into fields, so they burn up, and they power lines, I think fields and power lines, and then 1 went down in Bayou Blue, which I passed on the way here. So like, oh, I know that place. The blimps were unmanned at the time, so luckily no one was hurt, and miraculously, no one on the ground was hurt either. So, but the incident was reported in an extra edition of that newsletter, and they said it is hard to put into words what just happened and the things we witnessed Friday morning. To see those huge $250,000 blimps burst into the night and to crash is a scene we will never forget. So on April 29th, at the end of that terrible month for them, the base held a memorial to the 9 lost crew members of K-133, and they dropped a memorial wreath into the Gulf.
I remember seeing blimps over my home during the war.
So this is a moment where this is a nicer moment for the blimps from Homa. This is at Lake Pontchartrain in New Orleans, and this was in June of 44. So this is more reminiscent, I guess, of spectator events like NASCAR or where you might see a blimp today. And that this was a ceremony, the Higgins Industries 10,000th boat ceremony, and that they had a big party where they did basically a reenactment of the Normandy landings just a few weeks after the actual event. And go big or go home, right? That's what that was Higgins. And so here you see soldiers storming the Lake Pontchartrain seawall, but they had blimps from a blimp from Homa at the time. But shortly thereafter, the squadron was deactivated. So that was in September 1944. So the story of the blimps, they did not get a U-boat. At that time, the real U-boat threat was already over. So it took so long to establish this and get it off the ground that the U-boats had moved on. They realized we're getting smarter and it's not worth their time in the Gulf. But one of the quotes from the end report about the efficacy of blimps, I guess, was, "You can't hit them where they ain't." And so I remember that, when you think of the blimps. But there are some interesting stories about blimps being used in rescue of folks after floods. I'm sorry, I can't remember exactly when it was, but they hover slow and low. So they could go over and they had megaphones shouting down to folks who were stranded. They could then identify where they were, radio in their location. So that's, there's a purpose for them. But we just saw the Higgins Industries in New Orleans. That brings us to the Big Easy, right? Already by World War II, the city had a reputation as a carefree, exotic place, and the war helped cement that reputation. There are a lot of people coming through the city looking for a good time, money in their pockets. One thing that's kind of surprising that you don't hear a lot about is there was a Cinderella curfew that was put into effect, so by the War Manpower Commission. And they ordered all places of amusement to close at midnight to fight absenteeism. They did not want their factory workers going out and all hours of the night and then coming into work, right? Or not coming into work. So, additionally, there was a 1942 state law prohibiting alcohol sales to servicemen after midnight, which could result in penalties and even arrest for the seller. So a fun thing to do is go through arrest reports or, the wartime arrest reports. But this is one fun booklet, brochure from the museum's collection, Off Duty in New Orleans, and it lists, restaurants. Many of them are still around today, places to go. The image on the right is a tour that took place for servicemen in the French Quarter. So, of course, that's Jackson Square. And like many other industrial centers, New Orleans saw a big population growth during the war. From under 500,000 people just under 500,000 people in 1940 to 559,000 people in 1945. So we didn't double in size or anything, but grew. Most came for work, either as civilians or in service with Uncle Sam as a boss. Most came for employment in war production, moving from small parts of Louisiana or other parts of the South for these better paying jobs. And some of these factories became cities in themselves. This is Higgins Industries, and this is a pretty famous image in the back, right on the crane. I don't know if you can see, but it says the guy who relaxes is helping the axis. And that was an employee generated slogan. They had all these contests come up with a good slogan for us. Higgins Industries had 7 plants and over 20,000 workers, and they even built a community. So they had a small subdivision, a town that they set up. And they weren't not by far the only game in town. They did have, the loudest, I guess, founder, but there were several other shipyards. Of course, Delta Shipbuilding, they were one of 9 emergency shipyards established and supported by the U.S. Maritime Service. So they built the giant ships, the Liberty ships, that brought supplies and individuals to the battlefront. And this is an image from Delta Shipbuilding. One you can see in the tall woman to the right of the man is Mildred Opie. I had the opportunity to interview her many years ago now, but she worked as a welder at Delta Shipyards. And like other folks, she worked for the phone company before the war. She was from Bayou Black, actually, and she went and moved with her sister in New Orleans, worked for the phone company, and saw an ad for welding classes for women. And she signed up, said, "That's for me." And after the war, she didn't stay a welder the entire time, but she really was very proud of her work at Delta. So in addition to shipbuilding, agriculture, food production was a primary source of Louisiana's involvement. I see some, I put this in here for y'all, of course, you know, where we are now. And Adam had trapeze. Adam made fun. He said, "Oh, that sounds so cute when you say it." So I don't know if I'm saying it right or not. I'm self-conscious of that now. But there was a constant push for more food production, especially in staple crops like sugarcane, rice, and sweet potatoes. And we had those plenty of those. There was something called the Rice for Soldiers campaign, and it focused on getting rice into mess halls of these camps. And you can read the Rice Journal from the wartime if you really want to. But this had a dual purpose of, in the moment, feeding folks, but also introducing these soldiers from elsewhere to rice, and creating this post-war market for the products of Louisiana. So the mess hall approach also played into the New Iberia company, Trepe. I'd love to hear later or in the question, if we have time for questions, about some of the wartime connections, if anyone has them. But candied yams ended up in mess halls and in field rations of soldiers. And so they came up with they used the pepper dehydrating machines to make dehydrated sweet potatoes and to use them in candying the yams. And that was something that they started doing in World War II and moved the canning operation to Lafayette at that time. So we have an oral history with Mr. Randolph Trepe on our website. And he talks about that. He was a young boy at the time, but working in the family company. And so they expanded. By 1945, they had supplied an estimated 12 million pounds of canned sweet potatoes to the military. So that's pretty cool right here. They received this A award. So this is a program that we have in the collection from a November 15th, 1944 ceremony that took place in Lafayette. And they received the A award. So this was a flag that they then raised at the company. So this is at the ceremony in Lafayette. And these photographs in the program were donated by the family. So we have these in the museum's collection. And the A was for agriculture excellence. It's similar to, you may have heard of the E award. That's the Army Navy E award for excellence in production. So this was similar in the food world. We are also looking for vintage World War II era labels. So if anyone has any of that handing, this is a little post-war, but I'm working on an exhibit on wartime food now. So certainly this material will see another use in the Chow Time exhibition, which will appear in a couple of years. So how did they staff all of these? How did they work the farms with many people, with a shortage of labor? People were heading from, I talked about how people went to New Orleans for higher paying jobs in these shipyards. There were alternate labor sources. Young students worked the fields. I think that was probably pretty routine anyway. But the Victory Farm volunteers employed nearly 1,000 high school students in Terrebonne Parish alone to harvest cane, but it wasn't enough. Luckily, starting in July 1943, German and Italian prisoners of war arrived in Louisiana. And Louisiana was home to 4 main camps and 40 other satellite camps across the state. So farmers were eager to use the abundant, cheap POW labor on their farms. Around 20,000 German POWs, that's about 5% of the total 400,000 that we had here in the US. Around 20,000 POWs were employed in sugarcane, rice, and cotton fields of Louisiana. And many of those POWs were probably from rural areas as well. There are stories about their backgrounds. And they came with job experience. And farmers paid the government $1.50 per man per day. So it was, but this is a postcard from a German POW who was in New Orleans writing home to his family. So Louisiana was home to an early wartime first related to entertainment in World War II. The first building used exclusively by the United Service Organizations, the USO, was located in DeRidder. Thousands of Louisianians volunteered their time to entertain troops, and the museum's collection includes a uniform from Beverly Norman. She was from Alexandria. We have this uniform in our collection, which is pretty spectacular. She was a 23-year-old model who was described as luminous as a magnolia blossom from her home state. Sweet, huh? She went on an eight-month tour of the Pacific with the USO Camp Shows Review Cover Girls Abroad. Very heavy literary show, I'm sure. She became one of the first performers to entertain the newly liberated civilian POWs in the Philippines. But even youngsters got in on the act. We have material from a young woman who went with her dancing school troupe to entertain wounded soldiers at hospitals in New Orleans. And then we have, go back one, please, Adam. Yeah, you probably know this collection. This is from, this is 6-year-old Billy Michael there on the left. He is from Zimmerman, Louisiana. That he's in front of his little schoolhouse. He's ringing a bell. He collected scrap metal and became one of the state champions for the most collected. As a prize, he earned a trip to New Orleans to a ship launch at Delta Shipyards, and he kept a scrapbook from that, or his mom kept a scrapbook from that trip. So we have that in our collection. I'm coming to a close here, but I wanted to talk about some servicemen and women from Louisiana who contributed in all branches and all theaters and all roles. Roughly 280,000 men and women from Louisiana served in uniform. These included the 24th General Hospital Unit, which became known as the Tulane Unit. A lot of these doctors and nurses were from the Tulane. They served in the Mediterranean. The 202nd Infantry Battalion was formed out of a Louisiana National Guard unit and was assigned to MP duties in Oran, North Africa, due to the large numbers of French speakers in the unit. So you often hear about the one soldier that was they called him Frenchie, or, and he became, so Cajun servicemen often lent their French language skills as interpreters, both officially and informally. But some well-known leaders sprung from Louisiana. Claire Lee Chenault grew up in the swamps and farm country of Northeast Louisiana and joined the budding U.S. Army Air Corps. 1937, he accepts an offer from the Chinese nationalists to study their existing Air Force and to set up this early warning system to protect against Japanese attacks. So under his urging, the Roosevelt administration agreed to provide China with 100 P-40 fighter aircraft, and he forms the American Volunteer Group, the AVG, popularly known as the Flying Tigers. So that's a Louisiana story. Another of the well-known individuals from Louisiana featured at the museum is Brigadier General Walter McIlhenny. You might recognize that name. So he spent 31 months in the Pacific as a Marine during World War II. There we go. All right. So on the right, you'll see, so of course, McIlhenny later served as president of the family's Tabasco Company from 1949 until his death in 1985. In the museum's Road to Tokyo gallery, you can see that's his helmet, his wartime helmet there. and the Japanese samurai sword that was responsible for that dent in the helmet. That was later captured, of course, by McElhenney. 6 Medal of Honor recipients hail from Louisiana, including one of my own relatives, a distant cousin who was from Bogalusa, Hewlin Whittington. That's him on the left. He led a successful defense against a German armored attack in July 1944. So Louisiana emerged from World War II forever changed by its wartime experiences. Population grew from 2.1 million in 1930 to 3.2 million by 1960. And for the first time, more people lived in cities than on farms. The war jump-started industrialization. And driving from here to New Orleans and seeing the cane fields and seeing the tractors, there were only 1,691 tractors in Louisiana in 1930, but more than 6,500 by 1945. So it was like, how can we produce faster, everywhere across the board? Also, while the war helped the civil rights movement across the country, change was slow to come to Louisiana. And I wanted to jump back in time a little, and talk about one event that occurred in Louisiana just a month after the war had been declared that showed how far we had to go. On January 10th, 1942, a large race riot broke out in Alexandria. And that's something that we don't hear about a whole lot. Many Southerners, white Southerners, resented the sudden appearance of African-American soldiers in their hometowns for training. And that was, across the South, but Louisiana was no exception. Alexandria was packed with soldiers on weekend leave when a white military policeman arrested a black soldier in front of the Ritz Theater. And accounts vary as to what happened, but 60 more MPs came, 30 policemen and state troopers and local white civilians, and this giant brawl started. So black servicemen were tear gassed and fought back with bricks and rocks. It got really messy. While the official record states that no one was killed, differing accounts suggest there were numerous casualties. So that's something that's still being examined. That's called the Lee Street riots in Alexandria. But it highlighted tensions between whites and African Americans across the South. This is another exhibit we have at the museum now temporarily. This will travel. This is up called Fighting for the Right to Fight. It's open through the end of this month, and then we'll hit the road as well, like our War II. This is one individual who was featured in both Fighting for the Right to Fight and our War II, and I wanted to talk about her as I wrap up. This is Theresa May Bell. She's from Corps. That's her portrait there on the left, and this is her family on the right. And along with another veteran of Theresa's unit, the 6888 Central Postal Directory Battalion. There's a film on Netflix that you can watch by Tyler Perry that's pretty great, I think, called 6888. So it's been 80 years since the end of World War II. We're celebrating all of these anniversaries now at the end of the war. And while I serve as senior curator, it's the National Museum. I always remind myself, and as a Louisiana native, and my team of the importance of collecting, preserving, and sharing the stories of our home state of Louisiana in World War II. So if you have stories of your family or a community that you feel are not being told, we're still collecting, and I'm happy to hear about that. I'm happy to share my card with you and hear.
Second Lieutenant Edward V. Loustalot from Franklin.
I don't believe.
He's the first American soldier to die in Europe in World War II.
Yes, he's on a memorial at the museum.
Oh, yeah?
In World War II museum?
No, he's in the museum up across the bayou from the courthouse.
There's a big walker.
Yes.
You, sir?
That's one thing. It can get
He's not known, but we went to Dieppe where he died.
uh-huh.
And it's like another world because we went the anniversary. How many red, white and blue? We had red, white and blue flowers. We must have put out 10
Yeah.
of them in different places. And I even have some pictures to show you, but, it seems as if those people are more grateful than anybody in the United States. I mean, who in the United States has even heard of it? And
Yeah.
we went to this thing.
Yeah.
I mean,
They knew.
It's-
champagne brunch. I mean, they entertained us like
Yeah.
royalty, truly.
It's
And
pretty
it's so
special.
Grateful.
Yeah, it really is. It's very special to be there and, you know, to experience that. People, that every day they're still caretaking of the graves. You know, that's one of the major initiatives. It's really incredible. But I've been with World War II veterans on trips to Europe, and it's, you know, I've had to act as a bouncer for these 95-year-old men who are like, you know, stay back, people, you know, give them some space, because the admiration and the appreciation is there. But that's, you know, when you ask, do you know this story? That's one thing that can get a little overwhelming because there are so many stories out there, right? And I learn something new every single day, 10 new things every day. And that's why we're here, you know, to collect and to preserve these stories, to gather them together while they're still in living memory. Yeah.
Information about the prisoner of war camps in the museum.
In the US,
Louisiana.
in Louisiana, no, we don't.
There's a list.
Yeah.
The prison camps. And, Mr. Chris is for.
Yeah.
Mr. Chris was a guy who researched all the World War II German sub captains.
Mhm.
And all.
So CJ Christ, yeah, CJ Christ from Homa and the Homa Regional Military Museum. Yeah.
In there, and how many prisoners were held at that camp.
Yeah.
It's called World War II in the Gulf of Mexico by C.J. Christ. You can't get that book library.
And
If
then-
you want to check it out.
Yeah.
Event Saturday is
There was
called
a-
which Saturday?
There was a presentation at the
March
WWII in 1981 on the Prisoners of War of Louisiana. I
Yeah.
remember going there as a student.
Yeah.
And they call, it was on the art of the prisoners.
So there were, the biggest camp was in Ruston and Camp Ruston, and they produced a tremendous amount of art, in particular there. They also had time on their hands, and they, you know, so they created a lot of material. I'm actually giving a talk in November on German POWs in Louisiana, or in the South, really.
Married 3 of the prison guards. And, you know, that's kind of an interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. I mean, and especially in New Orleans, they had Italian POWs as well. New Orleans has a lot of Italian Americans, and they would invite them to Sunday dinner, you know, that kind of. So there was a lot of interaction, especially for people that were using German POWs as farm labor. You know, they had a lot of interaction with local population. So it's an interesting thing. I have a background in German and German history. So you know, reading those letters is fascinating, you know, people writing home about their experiences.
Very interesting. Any other questions? Not for so much a question, but it's amazing when you think back to the early colonial days of Louisiana. We talk a lot about, the French colonizing this place first, and then of course we were a Spanish colony. But two of the European countries that had such a huge impact on our culture are the Germans and Italians.
Yeah.
Here in the 17 and 1800s, and then you fast forward to now,
Right.
and they're prisoners of war, those particular populations. So it makes sense that they would have some crossover, maybe even relate to the locals in a way.
Yeah. That's
Did you say you were doing a talk in November about prisoner of war camps?
yes. So we have in New Orleans, we have so at the museum we have a program kind of fun called Dinner with a Curator. So we have we pair a dinner. I guess maybe it'll be some German food. I don't know. We pair a dinner with a talk. And so it's on the website, or I'll give you my card and I can share that information with you. Yeah. So yeah, that'll be November, I think 18th. It's kind of close to the holidays. I know it's, yeah, but yeah, hope some people make it. So
Thank you all so much.
thank you. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Next.